volunteers for organizing this lecture series to keep your knowledge up to date. So, as you all know, the most common electrolyte abnormality observed in hospital patients is hyponatremia. It is defined as a serum sodium level below 135. So we call it mild when it is between 130 to 134. We call it moderate when it is 125 to 129. And we call it severe when it is less than 125. So how is the clinical presentation? Signs and symptoms of hyponatremia depend on mainly two things. One thing is the severity of the hyponatremia, that is the level of hyponatremia. And the other factor is the rapidity of onset of hyponatremia. If somebody has a very mild hyponatremia and if it has developed over a very long period, usually the patients are asymptomatic or they could be minimally symptomatic. In contrast, if somebody has severe hyponatremia, like sodium less than 125, and if it develops over a quite short period, then the patient will be severely symptomatic. And sometimes there could be associated substantial morbidity like cerebral edema. So mild to moderate hyponatremia, usually the patient has nausea, malaise, lethargy, poor coordination, somnolence, headache, loss of appetite, muscle cramps, and personality changes. Regarding this headache, mind you, a lot of hyponatremia patients may have intracranial pathology. So just don't attribute headache to hyponatremia. You have to actively look for and exclude that central nervous system causes for headache before you attribute headache as a symptom of hyponatremia. Then severe hyponatremia, patients would be confused. They will have vomiting, deep somnolence, low GCS, seizures, and can result in cardiorespiratory distress. So severe and rapidly evolving hyponatremia lead to seizures, coma, permanent brain damage, respiratory arrest, brainstem herniation, and ultimately death. So how would you evaluate hyponatremia? First of all, we have to attend the emergencies. If there are life-threatening symptoms like low GCS, respiratory distress, you need to do emergency management such as intubation and fluid resuscitation. Then only you go for sodium correction. So how do you do a sodium correction in emergency situations? That is with intravenous 3% saline. I will deal with it later on the lecture. And then what you do is you try to preserve serum and urine for analysis later if possible. Then have to exclude pseudohyponatremia. How do you diagnose and exclude pseudohyponatremia? Again, that I will discuss later in the lecture. And then try to elicit whether the patient has hyponatremia of onset, acute or chronic. This is a very important thing. One thing this is important for your diagnosis as well as for management. So the next important thing is the volume status. So when you see the patient, the first thing, look at the patient's volume status. Look at the mucous membranes, blood pressure, pulse rate, skin turgor, and decide whether this patient is hypovolemic. That is, whether the patient is dehydrated. If the patient is hypovolemic, that means patient is losing his sodium as well as water through the kidneys or GI tract. And the loss of salt is much more than the loss of water. That is why patient has hyponatremia. Then if the patient doesn't have features of hypovolemia, then patient could be either euvolemic or hypervolemic. If the patient is euvolemic, most likely the diagnosis would be something like SIADH. There, the body sodium levels are normal, but there is increased total body water. That is, there is failure to excrete free water from the kidney. So there only a water volume has increased. So you have to manage in a different way the euvolemic patient. And if the patients are hypervolemic, that is, if the patients are edematous, as in the case of heart failure, cirrhosis, and renal failure, what happens actually is your total body sodium increase as well as your total body water. So increase in body water is much more than the sodium. So patient would be hyponatremic. So all these three categories are managed in a different way. So we have to very important in the assessment. You have to know whether the hyponatremia is acute or chronic and the volume status. How do you diagnose pseudohyponatremia? What is happening in the pseudohyponatremia is you actually have a normal sodium level in the body, in the electrolyte, in your serum. But when you measure in your analyzer, it will show a falsely low sodium value. That is because your blood contains some osmotically active substances which would interfere with sodium measurement in the analyzer. So actually you are not depleted in salt, but you are getting a falsely low report due to triglyceride or high proteins or high sugar or mannitol or glycine in your body. So how would you suspect somebody has pseudohyponatremia? That is because this patient's actual sodium is normal, they are not symptomatic. And their serum osmolality is either normal, as in the case of triglycerides and proteins, or serum osmolality is elevated with the sugar and mannitol. So, in true hyponatremia, patients should have low serum osmolality. So that is how you diagnose pseudohyponatremia. So if you want to get a true value of in the patient's sodium level, when you're suspecting hyponatremia, you have to measure sodium in a direct assay. One of the direct assays we have is the blood gas. So you can get a rough idea of the actual sodium level in that patient by doing a blood gas. So how would you manage pseudohyponatremia? You don't need to manage because your sodium is actually normal. Nothing, you don't need to do anything, but only look whether there are causes for high triglycerides, proteins that needed treatment. Once you exclude pseudohyponatremia, you have to determine whether this is acute or chronic. We say acute when the onset is less than 48 hours. So you should have a well-documented, you should be quite sure that sodium level had been normal before 48 hours. We call it chronic when the onset is more than 48 hours. Sometimes life is not easy as that acute or chronic. Most patients doesn't give a history at all. In those situations, if you do not know the history, you consider it as chronic. So why you need to differentiate this? More the acute hyponatremia, there's a greater risk of cerebral complications like cerebral edema and brainstem herniation. So you need to identify them and treat them aggressively to prevent complications like cerebral edema and herniation. But what happens if you aggressively treat chronic hyponatremia? They will deteriorate because when there is chronic hyponatremia, when your sodium is low for more than 48 hours, your brain has already adjusted to that level of sodium. So if you go and aggressively treat hyponatremia with saline or salt or whatever to raise the sodium quickly, it will result in osmotic demyelination of the pontine region and extrapontine region, resulting in irreversible brain damage. So in the chronic hyponatremia, you have to be very careful, you have to be very slow in correcting hyponatremia. So you need to monitor patients carefully to avoid overcorrection. And then you need to look for whether there are any obvious causes for hyponatremia. The common thing is drugs. Among them, diuretics are the main culprits. There are of diuretics like thiazides, loop diuretics, and spironolactone, but among them, thiazide is the main drug causing for hyponatremia. And also you have ACE inhibitors, ARB, which loses sodium through your kidneys, and omeprazole, is a commonly used drug. And there are a list of other drugs causing syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. I will give the list later. So look whether the patient is taking any of those drugs. If there is an obvious cause for hyponatremia, you don't need to further evaluate with osmolalities and all. You can just try to stop or adjust the drugs. But having said that, mind you that these drugs are mainly either cardiac drugs or neurological drugs like anti-epileptic agents or antipsychotic or antidepressants. So please take the relevant opinion before adjusting those doses, because otherwise patient will develop complications of heart failure, or patient will develop a seizure if you adjust the drugs without their knowledge. So try to adjust the drugs. If your sodium corrects with your drug adjustment, no need of further evaluation. So these are a big list of drugs causing hyponatremia. Commonest drugs are thiazides, ACE inhibitors, aldosterone antagonists, amilorides, loop diuretics. And then you have your antiepileptics, carbamazepine and valproate, and SSRIs and TCAs, antidepressants. And also omeprazole. Nowadays, a lot of patients are, for some or another reason, on omeprazole. So you can stop that and see. Another thing that you need to know when evaluating hyponatremia is serum osmolality. Serum osmolality can be measured directly, or you can calculate the serum osmolality. The normal osmolality is around 275 to 295. So how would you calculate? Serum osmolality is the amount of osmotically active substances in your blood. So what are those? They are your sodium, glucose, and urea. How do you calculate it? You multiply sodium by 2 and then add glucose and urea, and the all units should be in millimoles per liter. Then you can calculate your serum osmolality. In true hyponatremias, both calculated and your measured serum osmolality should be low. Few words about urine osmolality. The main importance of doing urine osmolality is to differentiate primary polydipsia from other causes of impaired free water excretion. So if somebody has primary polydipsia, their urine is quite dilute. So their urinary osmolality is usually less than 100. However, in impaired free water excretion, as in SIADH, their osmolality is inappropriately high, that is more than 100. So you can differentiate primary polydipsia from other causes of hyponatremia by doing a urine osmolality. And this should always be coupled with the serum osmolality and serum electrolytes done at the same time for further interpretation. Another important thing is urinary sodium. This gives quite a lot of information. If somebody has extrarenal salt loss, that is as in diarrhea or vomiting, patient is losing sodium through GI tract, your kidneys should try to preserve and keep your sodium. So your urinary sodium loss is low. So urinary sodium is low. It should be less than 25 to 30 in extrarenal salt. But in SIADH and other causes of salt wasting, you lose your salt through the kidneys. So your urinary sodium levels are more than 40. In renal salt wasting or cerebral salt wasting syndromes, your urinary sodium can be very high. But there are a few caveats in doing urinary sodium, because urinary sodium is a direct measurement of your oral salt intake. If somebody, for some reason, for cardiac or liver problem, if you stay on a low salt diet, urinary sodium can be anywhere low. Or if the patient is on oral salt, or patient has received normal saline or 3% saline, in that patient, urinary osmolality can be very high. Sorry, urinary sodium can be very high. Therefore, always before starting the patient on 3% or salt or whatever, try to preserve a urinary sample to do a urinary electrolytes. This will help in the future course of evaluation and management. So this is a rough outline of evaluation of hyponatremia. So you exclude pseudohyponatremia, you exclude the drugs causing diuretics, then look at the most important thing comes next, that is the volume status. Look the patient whether it's hypovolemic, euvolemic, or hypervolemic. If the patient is hypovolemic, that is, if the patient is dehydrated, you look for a urine sodium. As I have already discussed, if the urine sodium is less than 30, 25 to 30, you know that is not renal loss, that is extrarenal loss, as in the case of GI losses, burns, or bleeding, or pancreatitis. If the urinary sodium is high, you know that the sodium loss is through the kidneys. So that causes would be diuretics, ACE inhibitors, ARB, cerebral salt wasting, and salt losing nephropathies, and adrenal insufficiency. What if the patient is euvolemic? There are only few diagnoses. If the patient is euvolemic, that is, the diagnosis is either SIADH or hypothyroidism or primary polydipsia. You can easily differentiate polydipsia from SIADH by urinary osmolality. If the osmolality is less than 100, it is primary polydipsia. More than 100, it could be SIADH or hypothyroidism, and you need a TSH as well. If the patient is hypervolemic, most likely causes would be heart failure, renal failure, cirrhosis, or nephrotic syndrome, giving rise to hyponatremia. So now we know how to come to a diagnosis in hyponatremia. So few words about syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. We call it SIADH. Sorry about the spelling mistake here. It should be SIADH. SIADH is the inappropriately increased secretion of vasopressin. It could be from your pituitary or from an ectopic site, as in the case of small cell lung cancers. What does your ADH do? It reabsorbs water from your distal convoluted tubule. So there is inappropriate ADH causing increased water absorption. So that's why you get hyponatremia. So we have few criteria to diagnose SIADH. The essential criteria are serum osmolarity should be less than 275. That means it should be a true hyponatremia. And urine osmolarity should be more than 100. And patient should be clinically euvolemic. And urine sodium should be more than 30. And mind you, that is with normal dietary salt and water intake. And you have to exclude adrenal, thyroid, pituitary, or renal insufficiency. So in all the patients, most of the patients with hyponatremia, you might need to do cortisol, TSH, and creatinine level. And you have to exclude renal, any recent use of diuretic agents. There are some further supplemental criteria as well. These are not used very commonly, can be used in difficult situations. So I'm not going into detail. So once SIADH is diagnosed, you can't just wait. Now I am having the diagnosis. Because once you diagnose SIADH, you have to actively look for a cause. So during further evaluation with imaging the brain, abdomen, or chest to look for a cause for SIADH. So what are the causes? Mainly, any inflammatory, infective, or malignant condition can give rise to SIADH. So any thoracic, abdominal, or hematological malignancies, any lung infection, inflammatory or malignancies, and in the nervous system, any infection, inflammatory processes, trauma can give rise to SIADH, as well as there's a list of drugs which can cause AVP secretion. In addition, some hereditary causes are there as well. Another entity we came across, it is cerebral salt wasting. So what is cerebral salt wasting? That is, you are losing your sodium through the kidneys due to a pathology in the central nervous system. So it is characterized by hypovolemia, polyuria, high urine osmolality, and high urine sodium. So more or less same to SIADH, except that these patients are polyuric and hypovolemic, whereas SIADH patients are euvolemic and their urine output is normal. And usually in the salt wasting syndrome, your urinary sodium would be in hundreds to 200s. Usually it is less than 100 in SIADH. And in cerebral salt wasting, there is obvious intracranial pathology. Commonest is subarachnoid hemorrhage. How do you treat? It is also different from SIADH. Here in the salt wasting, if somebody is wasting salt and water, you need to replace salt and water through normal saline, no salt. You never restrict input in salt wasting, and you treat the patients with fludrocortisone until the primary pathology is resolved. Now coming to the management of hyponatremia. Management of hyponatremia is not just 3% or oral salt or input restriction. You have to take several things into your consideration when you're managing a hyponatremic patient. You have to know the patient's sodium level, whether it is mild, moderate, or severe. And then you have to go by the patient's severity of the symptoms, whether there are severe life-threatening symptoms or there are mild to moderate symptoms. And then we have to assess the disease acute or chronic. And then again, you have to look at the etiology of the hyponatremia. And then you have to assess the risk of osmotic demyelination syndrome. So all of these things you have to consider before managing a hyponatremic patient. We have few pharmacotherapy available for hyponatremia. I will go through them first before giving the outline of management. We have 3% saline. It's a hypertonic saline. You can use as a bolus or infusion for moderate to severe life-threatening symptoms. How would you give it? I will discuss later. Then we have normal saline. This you can use only in hypovolemic hyponatremia, that is in a dehydrated patient, not for a euvolemic patient. It will worsen SIADH, so don't give normal saline to SIADH patient. And we don't actually have salt tablets. Otherwise, there will be 1 gram salt tablets, and we don't have urea sachets as well. So these two also can be treated, can be used to treat hyponatremia. The mechanism of action is you give a solute load to the blood and it will cause osmotic diuresis. With the osmotic diuresis, it will drag your water with the osmosis, and that will improve the free water clearance and improve hyponatremia. That is how it works. And there are another class of drugs called vaptans. Those are V2 receptor antagonists. That is where the ADH-2 actively works on to reabsorb water. So this is mainly used in treatment of SIADH and sometimes in some sort of hypervolemic hyponatremia as well. Problem is this is quite expensive. 1 tablet costs around 1,500. It's not freely available in the government sector. We also have lithium and demoxycycline. They are currently used sparingly. We don't use it much now. These are all again treatment for SIADH. So I would like to give you a bit of algorithm how to treat hyponatremia. So if somebody with hyponatremia has severe symptoms like coma, obtundation, seizures, vomiting, respiratory distress, then we treat them with hypertonic saline. And then it is followed by fluid restrictions and vaptans. And if the symptoms are not much severe, moderate symptoms like altered mental status, disorientation, confusion, gait instability, unexplained nausea, then you need to know the volume status before starting a treatment somebody with moderate symptoms, because this is not emergency management. You have to plan and give. So if the patient is hypovolemic, you can try normal saline or oral salt. If the patient is euvolemic, as I have already mentioned, you can't give normal saline, it will worsen your hyponatremia. In that case, if the patient has moderate symptoms, you have to give either 3% saline, urea, salt, or vaptans, and it should be followed by fluid restriction. And if the patient is hypervolemic, like in cirrhosis, heart failure, you can use salt and water restriction, and in some selected patients, vaptans. And all this should be followed by fluid restriction if you are either euvolemic or hypervolemic, because fluid restriction will take 4 or 5 days to act. And if the patient doesn't have major symptoms, if there are minimal symptoms like irritability, poor concentration, depression, and all, then you can try fluid restriction. It will bring up your sodium slowly, but you might need to pick up sodium in some, even the patients are minimally symptomatic. There are some instances that you might need to bring up sodium a bit faster. For example, if the patient's, one thing is if the patient is unable to tolerate fluid restriction, you might need to give something pharmacological. If there is a predicted failure of fluid restriction, that is, so how, then you can consider pharmacotherapy. When we say predicted failure of fluid restriction, that is, if somebody has a very high urine osmolality, like urine osmolality more than 400, 500, and very high urinary sodium, it is more likely that your fluid restriction is going to fail. So in these situations, if you can predict that fluid restriction is not going to work, then you can use pharmacotherapy. Or even if the patient is asymptomatic, if the sodium is quite low, less than 125, you can start on pharmacotherapy. And then if you want to correct sodium for a surgery or to discharge the patient, you can again give pharmacotherapy to improve the sodium. And again, for patients with unstable gait and high factories, you can consider pharmacotherapy with salt or hypertonic saline. So this is an outline of how to manage hyponatremia. So how would you manage now acute severe hyponatremia? As I have already discussed, you manage with 3% saline. So how would you give it? You can manage 3% saline as a bolus. If the patient is having a seizure or having respiratory arrest, what you can do is you can give a 3% saline bolus. The dose is about 100 to 150 milliliters of 3% saline over 20 minutes. So your aim is to bring up your sodium level by 5 millimoles within these 20 minutes. So after giving the bolus, you can repeat another electrolyte to make sure whether there is a rise in sodium by at least 5 millimoles. If that has not been achieved, you can give a repeat bolus of 3% saline. Once your sodium has reached more than 5, you can continue IV infusion of 3% saline, and your aim is to increase sodium by 0.5 millimoles per hour until there are improvements in symptoms. So your total sodium rises by 10 millimoles per liter in total, or your serum sodium reaches 130. So once your serum electrolyte shows sodium more than 130, or rise of sodium, let's say when you start resuscitation, it was 115 and now it is 125, then you have to stop 3% saline. So maximum rise 10. Or if there are improvement of symptoms, once any of these things occurs, you can stop your 3% saline. So how to set up, now you know how to give a bolus, and now how to set up an hypertonic saline infusion. So you can choose on a desired correction rate for sodium rise. The most commonly used rates are either 0.5 millimoles per liter rise per hour or 1 millimole per liter rise in sodium. Then you estimate the patient's weight, say it is about 60 kilos. So what you do is you multiply the weight by the desired correction rate. So if the weight is 60 and you want a 0.5 millimoles rise in sodium, you have to give 30 ml per hour infusion. So how long to give? That depends on the total amount of rise in sodium you want. Say if you want to rise 4 milli, if your sodium is 120 and you want to make it 124, then we can give 30 ml per hour for 8 hours. That is 0.5 millimoles per rise for 8 hours, or 1 millimole for rise for 1 hour. You can give 60 ml per hour for 4 hours. So that is a calculation. There are other complex calculators as well, but none of these calculators are quite correct. So always you have to monitor while the patient is on 3% saline infusion. So at least measure sodium 4 to 6 hours once you start the 3% saline before further continuation of the dose, because there can be a lot of errors in using all of these calculators. I have taken this one because this is quite correct, as well as this is easy to remember. Now moving from acute hyponatremia to chronic hyponatremia. In chronic hyponatremia, the serum sodium, I have already discussed, must be corrected very slowly. You have to do close monitoring to avoid overcorrection. So goal is 4 to 6 millimoles per rise in a 24 hours. And the maximum rise we can go is up to 10 millimoles per liter in the first 24 hours and 8 millimoles per day afterwards. So total maximum rise for 48 hours possible is 18 millimoles over 48 hours. If you overcorrect, this can result in osmotic demyelination syndrome due to rapid fluid shifts. So in the present, there are some predisposing factors for osmotic demyelination syndrome apart from a sodium correction. So if the patients have already predisposing factors for osmotic demyelination syndrome, the correction rate should be even lower. It should be less than 8 millimoles per liter in the first 24-hour period. This is in contrast to acute hyponatremia. If the duration is less than 48 hours, you can aggressively treat, but in hypo, you can't. Rapid. And what is this osmotic demyelination syndrome? Once you do rapid correction of hyponatremia due to intracellular shifts of water from the cellular compartment to the extracellular compartment, this can result in demyelination. It can be in the pons or in the extrapontine region and can result in serious neurological sequelae such as confusion and quadriplegia, incoordination, pseudobulbar palsy, and any of the palsies involving the pontine and the extrapontine region. And this occurs about 1 to 5 days after sodium overcorrection. And the dreaded thing is this is irreversible. Once it is done, you can't reverse it. Patient will be quadriplegic. So you have to be very, very careful when you're treating chronic hyponatremias. This is only in chronic hyponatremias, not in acute. So what are the risk factors for osmotic demyelination? It is said like if the patient's sodium level is less than 105, there's a 50% chance that patient can result in osmotic demyelination. So when the sodium is at less than 105, you have to be very careful and we try to grow slowly as possible, keeping to the rates less than 8 millimoles per day rise in sodium levels to avoid this. Or if the patient has concomitant hypokalemia, or if the patients are having chronic alcoholism, malnutrition, so advanced liver disease, all of these things can predispose to osmotic demyelination. So you have to be very careful, go slow, and monitor your serum electrolytes frequently. So how to prevent? That is frequent sodium assessment as well as preventing overcorrection. And one important thing I would like to stress is you can attempt sodium reversal as soon as overcorrection is diagnosed. Say if you by any chance accidentally gone beyond the required rate. So what you can do is you can take expert opinion early before osmotic demyelination is established for sodium reversal. So we can give dextrose and desmopressin to try to revert back the hyponatremia. But make sure that you do referral early to prevent osmotic demyelination, because once it is established, it is not going to reverse even if you lower the sodium. So before osmotic demyelination syndrome is established, as soon as you diagnose it, please try to do reversal. And a bit of management of hyponatremia in SIADH. So SIADH is not a hypovolemic status. So the cornerstone in management is a fluid restriction. So severely symptomatic SIADH patient, as I have already mentioned, can be treated with hypertonic saline until their symptoms are resolved or your sodium levels has risen to a reasonable level. You have to restrict all intake that is consumed by drinking, not only water. Some take all the juices, orange juices, and all said, I took only water 500 but nothing else. But it is not true. You have to restrict everything by drinking, not just water. How much to restrict? What you do is, one easy way to do is target the input 500 ml less than the previous day's 24-hour urine. But as I have already discussed, there are predictors of poor response to fluid restriction. So such as the case of high urine osmolality or high urine salt. So in those situations, you can consider simultaneous treatment with salt, urea, and very carefully peptins. I have covered now the major parts of hyponatremia. Now I would like to go into management of hyponatremia in special situations. So what are the special situations? One thing is adrenal insufficiency. So you diagnose the adrenal insufficiency with a 9-m cortisol, and if necessary, short senescent test. If the diagnosis is adrenal insufficiency is there, you can manage those patients with hydrocortisone and fludrocortisone. If there is evidence of hypopituitarism, then you need to treat them with hydrocortisone and other pituitary hormone replacement. Hypothyroidism is an easy diagnosis. You can start thyroxine and the patient's hyponatremia will spontaneously disappear over some time. Heart failure is a bit tricky thing. You are fluid overloaded. You are on ACE inhibitors. You are on diuretics to optimize your heart failure management. All these drugs can again result in hyponatremia. But if you stop all these drugs, the pathology of hyponatremia is fluid retention in heart failure. So if you try to stop ACE inhibitors and ARBs and diuretics, you might worsen your heart failure, and it will again in turn make a vicious cycle that your hyponatremia may get worsened. So in those situations, what you can do is you can restrict input and try to optimize heart failure management. You might need to increase your ACE inhibitors and beta blockers. Discuss with your cardiologist. And in difficult cases, you can consider P2 receptor antagonists like tolvaptan under careful monitoring. What about cirrhosis? Cirrhosis is another condition you see hyponatremia quite often. One thing is due to the fluid retention caused by hyponatremia caused by fluid retention itself. And the other things, patients are on a lot of diuretic fusimines and spironolactones. So in cirrhosis, how do you manage hyponatremia? Usually mild to moderate hyponatremia does not need treatment unless the patients are symptomatic. Because improvement of the serum sodium is not going to make any survival benefits. So you don't go and try to treat hyponatremia in cirrhosis unless the patients are quite symptomatic. What you can try is you can try to bring up the blood pressure if the blood pressure is already low. So you can try to stop your beta blockers or alpha blockers, and you can try to withhold diuretics, especially hydrochlorothiazide. But you need to discuss with the treating physician before attempting any of this. And there could be a place for albumin replacement because it will expand your intravascular compartment, it will expand your intravascular compartment and take in your extravascular fluid into the intravascular circulation, as well as it has some salt in it as well. So and another few words and another special situation, that is management of hyponatremia in subarachnoid hemorrhage. You know, most of hyponatremia, if the patients are euvolemic, we try to restrict the input. But you never do this in a SAH patient because these patients are at risk of fluid vasospasm. So they are not usually treated with fluid restriction, rather they are treated with fluids to prevent these vasospasms. Otherwise, it will worsen your cerebral ischemia. So if the patients are severely symptomatic, as in any hyponatremia, you can give hypertonic saline. In contrast to the other patients, these patients should receive active treatment for hyponatremia even if their sodium levels are more than 130. So if it is 130 to 135 even, you might need to give some 3% or normal saline to bring up their sodium in subarachnoid hemorrhage patients. You can consider fludrocortisone if they are at risk of vasospasm, if there is associated cerebral salt wasting. And sometimes hydrocortisone may be used to prevent natriuresis as well. So these are some special situations you have to consider when managing hyponatremia. So with that, I would like to stop my lecture on hyponatremia, and I would like to emphasize on a few take-home messages. So first thing is, in any patient with hyponatremia, always exclude drug-induced hyponatremia. Because it is easy to diagnose and easy to treat, and you don't need further evaluation with osmolality if you know the culprit drug. And then the second one is volume assessment. It plays a vital role in establishing diagnosis in hyponatremia. So any patient with hyponatremia, do your volume assessment first. And third is try your best to preserve serum and urine for analysis before starting specific treatment, that is salt or 3% saline, no normal saline, because this alters the whole picture and make it difficult to get into a differential diagnosis and management later. And the fourth take-home message is management of sodium does not depend on the level of sodium alone. We have to carefully consider the etiology, severity of symptoms, duration of hyponatremia, and the risk of osmotic demyelination when you are treating hyponatremia. This brings an end to a short discussion on hyponatremia. And if you have any questions, you can type in your Q&A. We can discuss.